So that was the first noble truth of suffering. Second noble truth is the origin of suffering. So as I said, what distinguishes a practitioner is actually becoming aware that their life is dissatisfactory, is unsatisfactory, and therefore having the motivation to want to change it. And the motivation to change it comes from the second noble truth, the origin of suffering, that we are actually the author of our own predicament. All of the suffering and pain that we experience is a result of our own ignorance, our own actions. So basically, anything that we do from a confused, self-centered perspective creates karma and creates this ongoing perpetuation of suffering. So ignorance in this case is, it's not ignorance in the sense of an emotion, of ignorance of ignoring or doubt. It's ignorance in the sense of a fundamental ignorance of our own state of being. We don't understand that we are living in a world of our own projections. We don't understand that ego is something that we create moment to moment for the convenience of being able to bring everything into our territory. So we could say that ignorance has two aspects, and we could call these the two veils. So one veil is called the veil of the kleshas, or conflicting emotions. And the second veil is called ignorance of, or primitive beliefs in reality. This is according to the jewel ornament. Primitive beliefs about reality. In other words, that we exist as separate entities. So there's kind of an emotional, and I wouldn't say intellectual, but there's a knowledge aspect. So the veil of the emotions and the veil of knowledge. These two things comprise ignorance, or the origin. So the veil of the emotions is constantly being blown in various directions because of the strength of our own emotional reactions to things. So instead of seeing something clearly without preconception, we look at something and we have an uprising of anger or of desire or of some kind of grasping or poverty, whatever. And because of that, we are constantly in motion. Our minds are never still. Our minds are never relaxed and open, but always being tossed and turned on the stormy sea. So the emotions are like a perpetual wind that is always stirring up the waves of our mind. So that's one level of ignorance. And the second level of ignorance is more fundamental than that, where the veil of knowledge, where we, even if we can calm our mind through that and reduce the intensity of our kleshas and experience a sense of well-being, there's still a very strong sense of experiencer. There's a strong sense of duality. We're so habituated to how we experience the world that we always relate to the world in this kind of dualistic way. And a dualistic way means me and my perceptions, me and what I see, forms, sounds, smells, etc. But it's also me and my experience. So that's a more subtle level of confusion, where we, in some way, segregate our experience from the one who is experiencing. So do you notice that you do that in commenting? There's someone there appears to be someone watching, someone experiencing, someone commenting on the experience that we're having, the perceptions and feelings as they go through. Well, that someone that's experiencing or seemingly experiencing is just coagulated thought. It's just another twist of a dualistic mind. So this is called the veil of knowledge. So these two veils are what is actually broken through when we achieve realization, which is actually number 3. So the third noble truth is the cessation of suffering. Suffering actually has, well, I mean, we could talk about this many ways. From the point of view of discovery of the path, there are gaps in our suffering. There are gaps in our state of mind. There are gaps in the veil, in these two veils, where our mind is spinning with emotional defilement and kind of pasted with the underlay of the veil of knowledge or confusion about basic duality. But those moments are not continuous. They're always punctuated. They're punctuated by space. In meditation, we can say there's a gap. There's a gap when our mind lets go, or we notice that the discontinuity. It doesn't have to be so dramatic that we have this gestalt and let go of something. It could even be much more subtle than that this gap just happens. It could be happening 1,000 times a day. It could even be happening continuously, but we don't know it because we paste over our experience with this continuity of thoughts and emotions, or these two veils of emotional reactions, which include discursive thoughts and the basic underlying confusion about reality. So there are gaps in this process, and that gap is called the cessation of suffering. And cessation is an interesting word because that is, well, it sounds rather final, doesn't it? At the moment there is cessation of suffering, it is gone. It isn't that it's been put on a shelf. It's that suffering stops. So this notion of cessation of suffering, of course, it can relate to the ultimate idea of realization, that you can achieve realization, that you can completely abandon samsara. But from a practitioner's perspective, that seems like a long way off. So rather, for us, it's actually recognizing that the cessation of suffering is something that happens every moment. It happens every moment except that we don't experience it that way because we covered over with this seeming continuity of the glue of the neurosis and busyness of mind. We covered over with our fascination, with our desire for entertainment, with our desire to keep ourselves busy and occupied. If we watch in meditation practice ourselves going through and staying busy, keeping our minds full, keeping our minds busy and occupied, the closer we watch, the more we see that that process is continually falling apart. That it's actually momentary experience, and in between all the moments, or underneath all the moments, however you want to put it, is a lot of space, and that space is the cessation of suffering. So in a very real way, we can understand that there is a fruition to the path, there's a fruition to our journey, even at the beginning, which is why this teaching is so important, is that we don't, again, we can look at this two ways. We have the cessation of suffering as the end product, as what happens to us someday. But that isn't as helpful as understanding that suffering is something that is riddled with holes, that has no solidity, that is constantly falling apart and has gaps. So this is called the cessation of suffering. Noble truth number 4 is the path to the cessation of suffering. So the path is a huge topic and basically constitutes everything that we learn along our journey. But from the perspective of the Hinayana, or of the narrow vehicle, we have what's known as the Eightfold Path, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. So, interestingly, at least to me, I've mentioned before these overall 3 topics of the 3 types of learning, or the 3 prajnas, or 3 disciplines called Shila, Samadhi, and Prajna: discipline, meditation, and wisdom. So these eightfold path are clearly broken into those 3 sections. So first we'll talk about wisdom, or prajna. So number 1 is called right view. So right view is actually understanding a correct view of the world. So there's, again, many teachings on this, but the correct view is that of interdependence, that all conditioned things arise interdependently upon all other conditioned things. And that's one way of describing the notion of karma, that actions arise and they have a cause and they have a result, which we'll talk about a great deal more in future classes. But that's basically, from the Theravada or Hinayana perspective, the understanding of the right view is interdependence and its flip side, which is respect for karmic cause and condition. So if you don't have right view, then immediately you're going in the wrong direction. And as we study in the 10 unwholesome actions, wrong view is considered the worst of the 10 unwholesome actions because it leads to all others. all the other negative actions, because you're doing things for the wrong idea, because you have a wrong view. So, extreme example of that is a terrorist um, who sets off a bomb and kills a lot of people, but doing so believes that because of their actions, they will be reborn in heaven. So they actually think that they're doing something good. So you can see here, this is the opposite of right view, but you can see how destructive wrong view is, because if you don't understand the nature of reality, how the world and how your mind works, then you can be twisted and you can be manipulated by others, and you can also fool yourself. You can also have tremendous self-deception. So right view is very, very important, and this is the view of interdependence. Number two is right intention or right thought. This has to do with the having proper motivation, that we are, it has a kind of sense of decency, that we are trying to use our minds to overcome negative emotions. So this right intention is not allowing our negative emotions, our kleshas, to color our mental perception. Clearly, if we allow the kleshas to manifest, then we perform negative actions in both speech and body. So here we're talking, these two, the first two about mind, view, right view and right intention, how to work with mind. The first one has something to do with, it's almost like working with the two veils, the veil of knowledge. It's the progression of understanding how to work with how to understand our place in the world and our relationship and the sense of responsibility that we take for our actions. And right intention or right thought has to do with not giving in to neurosis and klesha activity. So it's both of those kind of knowledge and emotions happening together on the mental level. So right view and right meditation fall in the category of prajna, or wisdom, when we're talking about the three trainings. Remember, Eightfold Path has three sections. The first section is about wisdom, and that consists of two of the eight, which is right view and right intention. I'll go through these all again, and they're in the slides. The next three are how to have to do with discipline, or shila, how to work, how to behave in the world. And this has to do with how we affect others. First, the first of these three, or number three, so right speech involves always speaking words of truth, words of kindness and compassion, words of praise as opposed to criticism, and altruism, words where we are trying to be of benefit as opposed to being of harm. So that's right speech. Right action is avoiding all the negative actions of body. So, in other words, not killing, not stealing, not performing sexual misconduct, right action. So, our our speech doesn't harm others, and our bodily behavior doesn't harm others. And that extends further into right livelihood, which is how we sustain ourselves in the world is based on something wholesome and does not involve harm, harming other beings. So having a livelihood that is not only avoids killing, but avoids all kinds of um, shady activities. So those are the three of Shila, or morality, or discipline. Number 6 is called right effort. And I've seen this in the category of samadhi, and also sometimes it's in its own category, that it modifies all the other three, right? So that your effort can be applied to improving your view, or your motivation, or working to make sure that your speech is true, or that your bodily actions um, are pure. It also can involve um, the effort that you put into meditation practice. So that's where we'll call it today the effort in meditation practice. So right effort is important because conditioned existence, or samsara, will not unwind itself. You can't just wait for samsara to dissipate. Well, I guess you can, but the problem is that's what we've been doing since beginningless time. So it hasn't been very effective. And according to the Buddha's teaching, it's not going to be effective. It says in the Jewel Ornament, quoting many other sources, that samsara is notorious for having no beginning and no end. So the antidote to that is applying effort, is to always working on our path with diligence. And in this case, we're talking about the path of meditation. So this is the category of samadhi, or meditation. So we have right effort, then we have right mindfulness, and right concentration. So these are, there's many different translations of these words. We could say right mindfulness and right awareness. Right mindfulness having to do with the shamatha, shine aspect of stabilizing the mind, and awareness as the ability to actually become liberated and uproot the confusion of mind. But in any case, the aspects of meditation here are twofold: to calm the mind and reduce the impact of negative emotions, and avoid those subtle emotional tendencies to evolve and grow into actions of speech and body, which then create negative karma and perpetuate samsara. So right mindfulness is that which trims the branches and reduces those and right concentration in this context is known as samadhi, where we place our mind not only in that a stable state, but we actually penetrate mind to its very core. So this has to do with experiencing realization, or experiencing the gap that I talked about, or experiencing this cessation of suffering. and making the cessation of suffering, understanding it as a continuous experience as opposed to something that we have to achieve and build up to. It's what we have to do is remove these veils of ignorance, remove the habitual patterns of kleshas, and remove our habitual ways of thinking about the world and ourselves in a dualistic sense. And when we remove those, liberation is there. That's right, concentration. So whenever we talk about the path, we always have to talk about Shila, Samadhi, and Prajna. We talk about ways of understanding, we talk about ways of behaving, and we talk about ways of meditating. So our understanding then informs, because we have a certain understanding, it informs our behavior. So our behavior is beneficial, and we continue to create positive circumstances so that we have the merit to continue practicing. And because of the merit that we've created, we have the ability, we have the space, we have the time, we have the predilection to meditate. And because we meditate, our capacity for insight and understanding that which we've studied becomes greater. And so that it becomes a continuous positive feedback loop. So the Eightfold Path is a chariot that leads us to liberation, that basically has these three wheels, that of Shila, Samadhi, and Prajna. So I do have some slides, but I thought before I go through that, which is basically just kind of a reiteration of what I just talked about, are there any questions or discussion? All righty then. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Okay, so if you have a question at any point, just speak up, because I won't be able to see. I can't see the participants or hands or anything while I'm going through the slides. So we talked about the Four Noble Truths. Suffering, the word for suffering in Sanskrit is called dukkha, or in Tibetan, dugnal. Both of them sound like suffering to me. They're sort of anamata poetic. So the three types of suffering: pain of pain relates to unpleasant situations. Pain of alternation is pleasant situations, and all pervading pain is neutral situations. So any type of experience that we may have in conditioned existence is a kind of suffering. And I also talked about the suffering of the six realms, as well as the suffering of the three realms. So sometimes you hear this categorization, the three realms of existence. So the main one is called the desire realm, which has to do with all five realms, plus it's called the gods of desire. And so basically, conditioned existence is predicated on a certain kind of thirst. So we talk about beings having this fundamental thirst of desire, that we want something. We want to be happy. We don't want to suffer. It's that kind of fundamental level of desire. So from that sense, all six realms are categorized by the desire realm. And in addition, we have the form and formless realms of the gods, which are more refined meditation states, where someone can actually meditate so with such concentration that they go beyond even having awareness of their own body, and they just exist as in a mental state. And so the refined pleasure of that is very, very strong. But just like any of the realms, it doesn't last. I talked about the origin of suffering. Ignorance in Sanskrit is called avidya, and Tibetan is called ma rigpa. Ma is not. Ah in Sanskrit is not. Vidya and rigpa mean the same thing. Vidya means knowledge or insight, as does rigpa. And I talked about the origin of suffering basically falling into the category of the two veils: confused emotions or kleshas, and self-centered beliefs in an ego, primitive beliefs about reality. So the cessation of suffering is the elimination or a gap in the origin of suffering, is a gap in ignorance. And this goes by many names. The cessation of suffering, when we get into other levels of teachings, has many, many characteristics. And basically, this is the teaching on Buddha nature, that all of us are inherently have the nature of Buddha within us, but it's simply our ignorance or lack of knowledge of this fact that keeps us suffering. So Buddha nature also has many names. We talk about Dharmakaya, we talk about experience of Mahamudra, or the nature of mind, all of these things in the Vajrayana. But basically, they're all referring to this moment of the cessation of suffering. And this is a little chart I found on the internet on the Eightfold Path. And conveniently, it has this broken down into Shila, Samadhi, and Prajna. So Shila are the three in blue. Here it's called morality. I call it discipline or conduct: right speech, right action, right livelihood. Samadhi, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration in green. And prajna, or wisdom, right view and right thought or right intention. So that comprises the Eightfold Path. And again, I related those, just as I did just now, to the three trainings that we talked about pretty much in every class. So what we went through in terms of the description of the Four Noble Truths is a sequential experience from the point of view of the practitioner, or the point of view of someone entering the path of Dharma. The first thing that someone notices, and what distinguishes them and how they begin to walk on the path, is they notice that their life is dissatisfactory, is unsatisfactory. So they notice their suffering, and they begin to understand there's a cause for that suffering, which naturally motivates us to want to end suffering. And knowing that there's an end of suffering, we then are highly inspired to practice the path. The path, in this case, the Eightfold Path, or the path of overcoming ignorance and making continuous the experience of the cessation of suffering. Another way of looking at the Four Noble Truths is from the point of view of causation. So interestingly, we have the first two Noble Truths are basically the truth of samsara. And the second two, or the last two, are the truth of nirvana or liberation. So each of those has a cause and result. So the result of being in samsara is that you experience endless suffering. The cause of that endless suffering is ignorance. And similarly, from the point of view of liberation or nirvana, the result is the cessation of that suffering. And the cause is the path that leads you to that understanding, a full and complete understanding of cessation. And I always thought it was fascinating that both of the truths, both sets of two, start with result. So that's really, it's something to ponder, but I think it has to do with how we experience things. First, we notice that we're experiencing something, and then we wonder, why is this? So in the same way, first we notice that life is fundamentally unsatisfactory. And then we think, well, why is this? There must be some reason why. There must be meaning to this. So from the point of view of experience, we notice the result, and it leads us to wonder about the cause. But from a point of view of causation, of course, it's the other way around. Our ignorance creates suffering. But at any rate, I thought it's very interesting that the Buddha presented them in this order because of that, the experiential quality. Okay. All right. So those are all the slides I have. Is there any discussion or questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
So I think earlier on, when you first started talking about the Eightfold Path, you said it was from the viewpoint of the Hinayana. Is that correct?
Yes.
How would that be different for the Mahayana?
Well, each of the yanas has their own description of the path, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, it isn't like diametrically opposed. Each of the three turnings of the wheel of Dharma, the Hinayana, the Mahayana, and the Vajrayana, each rely on Shila, Samadhi, and Prajna, but they express it differently. They use different terminology, and they try to overcome any kind of hangover from the previous level of the path, if that makes sense. So the whole notion of the path being progressive is that what we learn today, what we learn in our practice today, is what we have to give up tomorrow.
Uh-huh.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, if we apply energy to learn to meditate, that application of energy is something artificial. So a Buddha, for example, does not have that kind of artificial intention because his or her actions are spontaneously the way they are. A Buddha doesn't think, I will benefit this sentient being today. The natural activity of a Buddha is benefit. So it's like the sun radiating light rays. So
Mm-hmm.
this is kind of an extreme example to understand. So the point here is not to become too attached to our techniques. So for example, another example, if you learn to meditate and you learn to count your breath, so you become very proficient at counting your breath. You can count up to 21 very easily, and every time you breaths without being distracted. Oh,
Yeah.
can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
I just saw an internet glitch for a second there. Um, well, the point of meditation is not to become a you know a, a breath counter. The point is to have awareness. So at some point, we learn to drop that technique of counting and just maintain the non-distractedness, maintain the awareness without having such a heavy technique. Does
Mm-hmm.
that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, it does. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Bart.
Bart. Oops.
Go ahead, Thea.
Thea, go ahead.
So does the Eightfold Path give way to the six paramitas practice? Was that what she's asking? Or am I off the path here?
Does it give way? So, what I was kind of describing that the heaviness of our technique, so the heavy-handedness of our meditation is necessary in the beginning, right? Because we have to apply a lot of effort to get ourselves to the cushion and sit down and learn, initially, if you remember, you have to train your mind to watch the breath. So that heaviness gradually dissipates and you're able to do the practice with less and less effort. So it becomes more effortless. So in a certain sense, the path naturally evolves into having a more subtle sense of effort. But it isn't that the initial teachings are abandoned. It's that they become a foundation. And that foundation, one's understanding of the path becomes more and more subtle. So I'll give you as an example, and you mentioned the six paramitas. So the path of the Bodhisattva, even though we're talking about the Hinayana path now, we'll digress a little bit to the path of the Bodhisattva. So in the Hinayana, we have one of the precepts is not to kill, not to take life. And this is one of the worst negative actions and creates the heaviest karma. In the Mahayana, you also do not harm beings unless by doing so, you will create greater benefit. So a bodhisattva, if there's a situation where killing another human being creates more benefit, then a bodhisattva would be breaking his bodhisattva vow not to kill. So there's an example of that. There was I don't remember exactly the story, but there was a bodhisattva who could see that a particular being was about to kill many people, and
It was on a boat.
I'm sorry?
It was on a boat.
Yeah, it was a captain, right? A sea captain. I can't remember exactly how the story went. Do you remember it?
Yes, you're right. Keep going.
So he knew that he could not stop this person from killing all those people. So he and all of actually the boat was full of bodhisattvas. That's what it was. This person was going to kill everyone on this boat, was going to sink the boat, I guess. And so killing a bodhisattva, let alone killing many bodhisattvas, is an extremely negative act. And because you're depriving sentient beings from the positive activities of a bodhisattva or a awakened person who's close to awakening, the karma for that is very heavy. So this person this bodhisattva saw that it was better to kill this being so that he would not take on the negative karma, such heavy negative karma, which would have plunged him into the lower realms for a very, very, very long. It's a more subtle understanding of the vow not to kill. It isn't exactly that you don't abandon that. It's that you apply it not indiscriminately. You apply it discriminately so that you provide the most benefit. So in that sense, yes, the paramitas improve our understanding of the Eightfold Path. I wouldn't say they replace it, but it becomes more profound and more subtle.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Stephen?
Yeah, I had a question about the formless realms. So are those, with the formless states, is that something that kind of a practitioner is that like a higher level, besides being a sort of God realm, is it also a higher level of meditation that sort of has to be gone through to attain the final goal, I guess?
No, it is not a necessary stage of the path. The Buddha, if you remember his life story, he did have 4 teachers, and each of the 4 teachers taught one of the 4 formless realms of experience, and he became very, very proficient at each of those much more quickly than even his teachers were. And so, and it was at that point where he decided that all the teachers in the world that existed at that time didn't have anything to teach him. And that's because they were all part of samsara. So that's what the meaning of that teaching is that it wasn't that the Buddha had to go, or we as a practitioner have to go through those stages. It's that they were all sidetracks, that they're all part of conditioned existence. So it doesn't actually help anything. So if you're wondering if you could make you could take a little vacation to the realm of the formless gods in your meditation, well, you could certainly do so, but all it is doing is in strengthening ego. It's strengthening samsaric tendencies. So no, it's not a necessary part of the path. I hope that's clear.
Yeah, it is. I guess maybe I need to talk about this, and I have very limited knowledge of it, but the jhanas, I thought my understanding was as you kind of progress in them that they get more and more subtle. And am I mixing that up with formless realms?
Well, it's a matter of definition. So the word jnana states they could have 2 meanings. One is they could mean these 4 formless realms, or I believe they could also be referred to the samadhis. There's various samadhis or concentrations that an enlightened being will know. So sometimes it's said that the Buddha knows 1 million samadhis. So in other words, if you remember, for example, the Heart Sutra, at the beginning of the Heart Sutra, the Buddha enters a particular samadhi where he sees the 5 skandhas as empty, right? And because he's into this meditative state, he creates this very powerful blessing. And Avalokiteshvara also sees that at that moment. He sees that the five skandhas are empty of nature. And then Shariputra, because he's so smart, he is inspired to ask Avalokiteshvara a question: how should a bodhisattva abide when looking at the five skandhas? So all of this is happening because the Buddha entered into this meditative state. At the end of the Heart Sutra, no one says, the Buddha praises Avalokiteshvara, but everyone else praises the Buddha. And that's because the power of his meditation state is what inspired everyone to have this experience. So I think the word jnana can also refer to these high-level samadhis or concepts that are talked about in the Mahayana and the Vajrayana. So those are actually more positive states that have a certain purpose and can benefit others, which, as opposed to the four jnanas, which are the formless meditation realms, they have no purpose other than more and more refined states of mental pleasure that you can experience in meditation that do not lead to liberation.
Oh, okay. Huh. I guess I'll have to, I guess I just have a generally confused understanding. I thought you had to become sort of a master of each of the jhanas, at least in the Theravada. Okay. Huh.
No, that's no. I mean, the skills of having that level of concentration you should have, but the infatuation or the holding on to that shamatha experience is not beneficial. So fundamentally, when we talk about, we'll get into this in a future class when we talk about meditation. We've been talking about prajna, right? So in the future, we'll talk about meditation. There's two aspects of meditation, as you know. Shamatha and vipassana, or shine and laktong. And shamatha, the development of peace, is worldly. It is not transcendental. You can do shamatha forever and you will never achieve realization. Shamatha is very important because it has to do with developing stability and focusing the mind on its object, which is totally necessary. And it also has to do with developing virtue and also creating merit so that you can maintain a positive existence. All of that is very positive, but it's still worldly, meaning that it's dualistic. It does not cut through ego. Vipassana, or laktong, on the other hand, is that type of meditation that actually cuts through ego, that undermines ego, that leads to realization. So the four jnana states of the formless realms are shamatha states. They are not vipassana states. So no, they're not necessary. And in fact, Trungpa Rinpoche taught that shamatha should not be practiced from that perspective because there's a danger of getting caught in them. And that's why we talk about the realm of the gods. Gods are extremely long-lived, right? They have, from our perspective, an almost infinite lifespan. So we don't want to get caught in an infinite lifespan of these kind of meaningless meditation states that may seem very seductive and attractive because they're very peaceful, but they don't benefit anything. They don't cut through ego. So no, they're definitely not, they're not required.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it's very clear. I understand. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Bart.
Yes?
Me again. In the Mahamudra, I think it says something about the shamatha and vipassana being inseparable at some point. There's a union.
In Mahamudra teachings, you mean? Is that what
Yeah, I think I've read that along the way.
Without a doubt. Yeah. Okay, we're kind of fast forwarding here. So I talked about the two types of meditation, shamatha and vipassana. Ultimately, there aren't two of anything, right? Both of them are practiced simultaneously. So in other words, when we talk about meditation, we talk about it in its two aspects. One is concentration or focusing mind on its object, the mind being able to settle and rest and experience itself, mind resting on itself. The second part is mind understanding itself, is mind cutting through the sense of duality. So that's how we initially experience shamatha. It gradually moves into vipassana. And ultimately, yes, we practice them together, or our experience becomes where they are together, where the ability to have mind focus on an object is not different, and our ability to understand non-duality in that moment. So sure, shamatha and vipassana come together. Traditionally, you have stages of meditation. You start at shamatha, then you go to vipassana. Sometimes we talk about mahavipassana, which is the same thing as the union of shamatha and vipassana, and then shunyata. So I mean, there's many ways of describing that progression, but yes, these two faculties of meditation, that of being able to focus the mind on an object, and that of being able that mind can understand its own nature, become one.
So, Mark here. I was wondering if you could expand a little bit more on. You talked early on about the gaps in samsara, moment to moment.
Yes.
Gaps. Is that something that we can experience, or it's just knowing that they're there?
No, absolutely. It's something you can experience. Do you experience it?
Well, yeah, I don't know if I'd ever called it that, but
Well, it can be very simple. I mean, yes. I mean, I think this is the third noble truth. This is the primary understanding of cessation, is that samsara is not continuous. Remember, from the nirvanic point of view, samsara doesn't exist at all. It's just a fabrication. It's just confusion.
right.
So this confusion of ego, which we think is continuous, is actually a sandcastle. So it's like I don't know how they make movies now digitally, but it's still the same thing. They're frames, right? So when you're watching a movie, you're watching 24 frames a second or whatever it is, or however that works. And because they are moving so quickly, you feel like they're continuous. So experiences like that is that the continuity is based upon this preconception of ourselves being a solid entity, and the fact that our discursive thoughts are so rampant and seemingly continuous. So the speed of always wanting to be entertained and always wanting the next thing and looking to the next thought, that's what creates this notion of continuity. But as in meditation practices, our mind settles, that notion of continuity, it becomes percolated or penetrated with discontinuity, which is the gap. So this, and it actually happens all the time. We think, and we're thinking about something, and all of a sudden we don't remember where we are. Or do you ever have the experience where you're very angry with someone and you're having a heated argument, and somehow something stops, and you have to recreate the anger? Suddenly, you're you have to kind of re-engage. Well, there was a gap, right? There's a little gap, but we don't normally notice or honor those gaps. We honor and notice the continuity or the seeming continuity. So without a doubt, it's very possible to experience these gaps. And I think that's actively what we do in meditation practice. We sit and we observe our mind. So the point of meditation is not just to observe your mind, it's to actually experience the discontinuity of your own confusion, which comes in the form of a gap.
Yeah, so that's, during meditation, you'll have a thought and then you realize, oh, I'm thinking, and then you let it go. And then the next second, you can't even remember what that thought was.
Right. Well, in meditation, when you have a thought and you notice that you're thinking, you could not have noticed that you're thinking if there was not a gap.
Oh, okay. Uh-huh.
So think about that. We may not catch the gap in that instance, but we catch the echo. We know there was a gap because we noticed that we were thinking. Our thinking is going on and on and on and on and on and on, and suddenly we notice that we're thinking. How could we notice if there was not a discontinuity? So meditation, in a way, is working backward toward that sense of, so that our mind becomes more and more present. So we catch the moment of discontinuity, or we catch the gap the moment the moment that our thinking process or samsara falls apart.
Yeah, thanks. That's very helpful.
You're very welcome.
Bart, what's the difference between those gaps in sort of experiencing the cessation of suffering and say an experience of nirvana?
I think it's a question of degree. Nirvana is a way of describing the continuity of discontinuity. The continuity of the absence of samsara, or the absence of suffering, or the continuity of the gap. So we think of a gap as something, thoughts are happening, thinking. Notice you thinking. There's a gap. But really, there isn't anything. The thinking is just going on top. It's, as I said before, it's kind of pasted. It's buttered all over our experience. And so the sense of spaciousness is actually ongoing. The spaciousness is continuous. So the discontinuity is actually continuous, but we don't notice it because we're so obsessed with the workings of our discursive thoughts.
So the spaciousness that that's well, I'm getting terms confused. So you wouldn't call that nirvana, right? The spaciousness, it's more experience of the spaciousness.
Well, nirvana is a word that means it's like the fruition, liberation. So nirvana means, I wouldn't say that you experience nirvana in one moment of meditation, right? I would say that's the result of the path of actually becoming realized. So we talk about it in a much more, in a simpler way, like, just as more humble. That we're experiencing a gap, we're experiencing spaciousness. You could say you experience nirvana in that, but I think that's a little bit too much.
But then there's the concept of like stream entry, and that could be just momentarily, couldn't it? And that's an experience of nirvana now.
Don't know.
Okay. Okay, good enough. Thanks.
Could,
You're welcome.
Bart?
Yes.
Bart, this is Alice.
Hi, Alice.
Could you talk a little bit more about Vipassana and what exactly it is and like some examples of, say, instructions for doing it?
I will. And I'm going to have to ask for a short break. I'll be back in 2 minutes. I just drank way too much water. So
Okay, no problem.
I'll be right back.
Let's chat amongst ourselves.
Please do.
Stephen, I wanted to ask a corollary to your question, or actually just more about it, because I'm a little confused about that the formless meditations, because that seems to me like entering into non-duality, which wouldn't be a trap. I wouldn't.
Maria, if you don't have any awareness of your body, how's that non-dual?
But the body's not real, Alice.
But your awareness of the body's real, Stephen.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
Maria,
Yeah.
Maria, the problem with the formless state of meditation is that it's a kind of bliss, our great amount of peace, to which we become attached. So there's a condition there, because when you stop meditating, then you're no longer in that state, but you become attached to it. In fact, sometimes too much so. So that you stay there. You don't go to enlightenment.
I understand that, but that doesn't answer my question, because
Oh, sorry.
that's how you what you do. You're trying to hang on to the state, but that's not a problem with the state itself. The state itself, if you're in a state of non-dualism and formlessness.
Oh, no. Formlessness means something else in this case.
Oh,
The realm of the formless gods is still duality. That's the difference. And maybe I'm understanding Stephen's question better. This is a problem with terms. So the realm of the gods, there's 3 levels of the realms of the gods of desire, gods of the realm of form, and the gods of the realm of formlessness. Realm of form means that a being in that state has a body, but it's a very subtle body. It's a mental body, not a body of, corporeal flesh and blood like we have. Formless is a world without, is an experience of a world without a body. So, but it doesn't mean that it's non-dual. There is a dwelling on experience at that level in the realm of the formless gods. And the dwelling on experience is duality. It's a dualistic state. So it is all within samsara, all of these realms. So the jnana states from that perspective lead one to the realm of formless gods, which is a dualistic state of existence, and it still has suffering. It is not free of suffering.
So
does that make sense?
Would the, in at least as I understand some of the Theravadan meditative states, you can reach these states where it's great peace and great bliss, but it feels non-dual. There's a dissolving that happens. Is that the formless state, or is that something else? Maybe Stephen can help me with this.
Don't ask me, Maria.
I thought that was what you were asking.
Well, the Buddha was very clear. He left those four teachers because they were worldly. They did not transcend the world. So it's not just that you're looking at those meditation experiences and the meditation experiences are pure and you're holding on to them and that makes it impure. The meditation experiences are samsara. They're just refined part of samsara. So it's like, samsara is the bottom of your trash can that's full of terrible, moldy, rotten junk and smells. Just like samsara is the most refined $300 or $3,000 bottle of wine. They're both samsara. And so the realm of formless gods is just refined samsara. It's nothing more than that. It's not something we should seek. And in fact, that's what the Buddha lived 2,500 years ago, and there were great Hindu practitioners, and that's what the Hindu practitioners were practicing. They were trying to reach these very refined states because they thought that was enlightenment. And that's what the Buddha taught us. That's not enlightenment. That is, it's just refined samsara. So there's nothing desirable about them from the point of view of liberation. If you want to remain stuck in samsara, then you can do meditation for that. But that's not Buddhist meditation. That's something else.
I think the way I heard them presented to me once was that when you're practicing those jhanas, that you're kind of looking for, I guess, maybe the impermanence or the sort of what's wrong with them, and that's when you've accomplished them. Would that be a fair way to practice? Or it's not even worth that?
I mean, if you're well, I suppose you could say that's how the Buddha practiced them, but the Buddha practiced all of those things because he was trying to seek a path that's beyond samsara. So the problem with seeking those is that you get stuck because they're so seductive and the pleasure is so strong, and people get stuck there for eons, is what it said. So my recommendation is to label it thinking and come back to your breath. There's no need. There's no benefit in these states.
So how did the Buddha know then that there was something beyond samsara?
Very interesting question.
Yeah.
Because of the cessation of suffering. Because he had a very strong experience of what that meant. And you'll remember when he was young, he had this experience when he went and sat and did meditation quite spontaneously underneath a tree.
Yeah.
The mango grove, I think.
Yeah, I remember the apple tree.
His mind settled, and he realized that he discovered a very peaceful state. Well, that was a gap, right? That he discovered the cessation of suffering even before he was on the path, right? There's a sense of the cessation of suffering. So what this means is that we all have this intuitive understanding of cessation, even without practicing. The cessation doesn't require a practitioner to experience it in order for it to be real. Cessation of suffering is a truth. The world is that way. The world is spacious without suffering. But we don't experience it that way because of our confusion. So, and remember, this is again why the Buddha presented cause presented result first, right? You could say, in some sense, we're moving, causally toward enlightenment. We're accumulating the causes and conditions and all of the prerequisites in order that we can become liberated. But in another sense, in a very real sense, we are already awake and we're just uncovering and we're letting go of what is confused. So that's a much more fruitional way of experiencing. And I think that's how the Buddha taught and how the Buddha manifests. And that's why we're talking about prajna first, right? If we were talking about a gradual path where we're building up prerequisites, well, we'd start with discipline, right? You have to, don't kill, don't steal. That would be talk number one, because you have to be, you have to fix your behavior, and then you fix your speech, and then you fix how to work with your mind, and then you learn to meditate, and gradually you experience wisdom. Well, in this case, the Buddha turned it all upside down, because we are already awake. We already can experience this gap. We can experience wisdom. We already know fundamentally that there is such a wisdom. We have to get back to that. We have to uncover it. We have to discover it. So it's a different kind of orientation.
Wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome. And so that's what Vipassana is about, going back to your original question.
Yeah.
That's what Vipassana is. So that whole discussion was a distinction between shamatha and Vipassana. Shamatha is being absorbed in a state of mind. As long as you're absorbed in any state of mind, you're in samsara. And you can use the skill of shamatha in order to then apply your mind to undermining and discovering how to be awake. But they're fundamentally very different.
Right. So the Buddha had all those kind of thought experiments, like going through the body and this and that. But that's not Vipassana, right?
Well, Vipassana is a big...
That's the word for those, yeah.
What?
They're contemplations, aren't they? They're not.
Yeah, Vipassana is a big word, and there's many different categories of Vipassana. So I think what's happening here, there's an intellectual Vipassana, and there's an intuitive Vipassana. And so I'm using the word Vipassana in the sense of intuitive Vipassana, that which understands the nature of mind.
Okay.
There is an intellectual Vipassana where you go through, for example, you go through all the categories of the skandhas. You go through all the categories of your body. You look, am I in my eyes? Is there an I in my head? Is there me in my heart? Is there me in my arms? And you scan all of these systems and you look through them seemingly intellectually. But what happens at the end of them is you find there is no I, no me, no entity in any of them. Mm-hmm. And then it jumps into the intuitive experience of Vipassana. So there is an intellectual Vipassana practice. There's many of them, but they lead into Vipassana in the true sense, which is a experience of cessation, experience of gap, experience of nature of mind.
Thank you. That's super helpful.
Bart?
Yes.
Time, but when I first started meditation practice, it was with Theravada teachers. And the practice of sweeping the body are the 4 foundations of mindfulness. After that, you do feeling. And as you say, you sweep the body, and whether you either a sensation that you're feeling or you just scan methodically with awareness, when they call it bare awareness. So in my understanding of the practice, there was no intellect involved. It's just using bare awareness. You just observe without thinking. There's no analytical thought happening.
That's another way of doing it. But there is a Vipassana that is analytical. Absolutely. Where that you
mean intellectual?
Yes.
Okay, I didn't know about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the Tibetans talk about it a lot.
Oh, okay.
So,
well, for the
this is why
Theravadins, it's just bare awareness. They call it bare awareness.
Yeah.
So it's like once you've settled the mind with shamatha, you use that stabilized awareness or mindfulness awareness to then observe experience. It can be methodical, as I said, sweeping the body, or just a sensation or a thought or a feeling that comes up, you using that awareness, using that moment of experience to observe if there's a essence or self there.
That's again one way of doing the Vipassana. And I would say that even though you're presenting it as in a way that's more experiential, that you're just using bare awareness, you're still asking the question. You're still you're focusing the mind with an intent to, is there an entity here? You're still looking at something. So there's something, it may not be discursive, but it's still intellectual. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's one of the very profound techniques. But at a certain point, Vipassana practice is that which shows how samsara falls apart. That which experiences cessation is Vipassana. Let me put it that way. Vipassana is the faculty of meditation, or the faculty of mind that experiences the cessation of suffering. Not just thinks about it, but actually experiences it.
Well, that is the experience when you're aware in that way. You do experience the non-duality, or the absence of self or duality, or it breaks down your presumptions.
Yes. Yeah, insight. Vipassana.
Insight, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a profundity.
Yeah. And so it's experiential.
Shamatha develops peace. Vipassana develops profundity.
Yeah. So it may start out as an intellectual intention, but by just plain being aware with, you let go of the intention, and you're just there and aware.
That's a gradual path toward Vipassana, as you gradually let go of the intention. There's also a much more direct. There's a direct, pointing out instruction is direct. It isn't. Okay. You don't think about it.
Okay.
Right. So, but again, all of these things are Vipassana. There's many different categories. So none of this is wrong. It's just.
Well, as you said, we have to let go of these hardcore techniques, more heavy techniques.
Well, I mean, that's the point of the path, and that's why we study the path. Is as we study and we become, even though in many cases we're studying aspects of the path that are well beyond our experience. So why do we do that? We do that so we can see where we're going, and we also do that so that we don't hold on to the path as something solid, which then makes it even harder to progress. So our path becomes, and our practice becomes more fluid.
Thank you, as always.
You're welcome, as always.
Bowing.
Non-theistic. I love that. How come we didn't think of that 20 years ago? Your nickname.
I had to practice the path first.
I see. Okay, you've earned it. Okay, so let's do the closing dedication. Through this merit, may I attain true omniscience, then having overcome all harmful, destructive forces, may I liberate sentient beings from the ocean of existence and its turbulent waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. May the most precious mind of awakening that has not yet dawned now arise. Once it risen, may it never decline, may it continue to increase evermore. May the most precious mind of awakening that has not yet dawned now arise. Once arisen, may it never decline, may it continue to increase evermore. May the most precious mind of awakening that has not yet dawned now arise. Once arisen, may it never decline, may it continue to increase evermore. So, thank you all very much.
You were going to say something about the next series?
Well, I do have the next series isn't scheduled. I want to talk to to Mark and the other administrators about it, but I have decided on the syllabus, and it's going to be on karma and its results.
Great.
Which is a very profound teaching and has many aspects. So I talked about them, one of them briefly tonight, interdependence. So the notion of interdependence and karmic cause and effect, the results of actions, positive and negative actions, and all of the laws of karma. And we'll also talk about reincarnation, ? So stay tuned.
That sounds great, Bart. I'm sure I speak for everyone when I say how much we appreciate what you've done to put this series together. And I know for me personally, it's been very, very enlightening and helpful. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark.
Svaha. Svaha.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
And ditto, Mark.
Full disclosure, being here, I have to apologize. I didn't get the recording turned on until about 15 minutes into your presentation. So I'm very sorry.
Oh, I noticed that. I noticed it came on. That's okay. So we missed the truth of suffering. Oh, well.
I started recording right when you started the second Noble Truth.
Yeah.
But hopefully people can look at the slides and get some idea.
Yeah. Maybe you put that in the description.
Yeah. I will.
That it got something. I don't think I forgot anything more than I actually did.
Just in
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. We'll see you at the next series when we'll try to start that. We'll talk soon. Have a good evening.
Okay, thanks, Bart.
Thank
Good night,
you.
everyone.
Good night.
Nighty night.